Hello and welcome to the next episode of our podcast on negotiation. And our today's episode will be with our senior negotiation expert, trainer, coach, diversely trained in negotiation, art, and science, Andreas Winheller. Andreas, great to have you with us.
Thank you, Remy, and thank you for having me. Looking forward to a wonderful evening.
Thank you so much, Andreas. There are a couple of questions that we prepared as a continuation of our discussion with Gary Nessner on the FBI tactics and how what is what is the best way of influencing even the most difficult partners. And before we start with our questions, I would like to dive a little bit deeper into your background, Andreas. I know you've been active in teaching negotiation for over 2 decades. Yes, how many negotiators have you trained so far?
Well, above 10,000. It should have been 10,000 in this 23 years. Yeah.
Wow, 10,000 negotiators, and they were very lucky to have you as their on their path to mastery as their negotiation coach and trainer. Andreas is also
Depends. I would say it depends. I think the participants they had me as trainer in the last few years were much more luckier than the let's say the beta test participants when I started in 2001. When I look back what I did in training then and I compare it to what I do these days in my trainings, that's a huge difference since you get more experience and a broader perspective on the field.
So what do you think, Andreas, has changed between now and then? Between Andreas in 2000 and Andreas in 2024?
Well, when I was in Harvard at the program on negotiation, I did the trainer course in 2001. And I was thrilled by that beautiful, brilliant theories and all that wonderful strategies. And I really came back with that idea that I took from this world-leading program and started to train to find the perfect strategy and the perfect tactic to dealing with rational people out there, with brilliant, civilized people out there. Unfortunately, just a few of us are really rational. I like to quote Richard Thaler, the Nobel Prize of Economics winner. He said in his speech, he said, real people are less like Commander Spock and more like Homer Simpson. As a summary of decades of his research in behavioral economics. And I think this is a good description on the perspective change that I had and the change that I did in my training. Today, I try to train for the typical
Homer Simpsons.
For the Homer Simpsons out there, like us.
Like us, exactly. So and one of the other changes between now and then, I guess, is your fascination with the crisis negotiation and the methods developed back then by Gary Nessner and his colleagues on how to handle difficult negotiators and difficult negotiations. Yes. Can you tell? Do you still remember when you first came across crisis negotiation as a field, and what fascinated you in that field the most?
Yeah. Well, first of all, around 20 years ago, I got first in contact with that field, but at that moment, I was not interested because it sounds to me it sounds really weird. It's because I was not taught by someone who was a real crisis negotiator, but I heard from a guy that we have in the German-speaking world, who is claiming to be a crisis negotiation expert, but never had been a real FBI crisis negotiator. And I read his books and his ideas, and I said, that's nothing that's valuable for me. So it has nothing to do with the business world. Escalation and stuff like that is not a helpful strategy for what to do. So I totally ignored that field. And then around 10 years later, I get in contact first with the ideas of George Kohlrieser. George Kohlrieser, professor in AMD in Lausanne, who had been a real crisis negotiator. And I read his book, and it sounded so different from what I had learned. And that was the starting point. And then I thought, okay, there's more. I want to understand the field. I want to read the real books written by the original crisis negotiator. And then I stepped deeper and deeper and got in touch with my friend Gary Nussner, which was real, which is the difference that makes the difference.
Yes, exactly.
And I had the chance to work together with him one-on-one, and I found that there's so detailed, so profound framework behind, which is really helpful on finding solutions to everyday problems that we have, even in business negotiations. So it was a long way to come to a situation where I'm here right now, where I say, well, I think these both worlds are two perspectives on the one world of negotiation, and we have to build bridges. We have to build bridges between the business school type of teaching negotiation and the crisis negotiation framework and the crisis negotiators network. We have to build bridges because we can learn so much
from each other.
If we combine these both frameworks. We can learn more from them than they can from us, because they have different negotiations. But we can really learn from them.
Mm-hmm. That's fascinating, and I think in terms of general public, probably when splitting the difference, as from Chris Voss hit the market a couple of years ago and immediately became a bestseller. Right? It is well written, has a nice story behind it, and people just love the story, right? And I think the readers divided into two groups. Yes, one group said, well, it's a nice story, but it's good that it works in hostage taking situations, but I'm not in my business. I don't really take hostages, or I'm not in the business of taking or releasing hostages, so it doesn't work for me. And the other group said, well, if it works, even if it works in hostage taking situation, crisis situation, then it's even more has to work in everyday business situation. So I have a certain hypothesis which group you belong to, Andreas. But can you somehow convince those who still think who are skeptical about the applicability of the crisis negotiation techniques and methods to join our camp?
Well, I'm a member of both groups, to be honest. I'm a member of both groups. I think when we look deeper into the Never Split the Difference book and Chris Voss' work and Chris Voss's framework, first of all, it's really helpful that he has started building bridges between the crisis negotiation world and the business negotiation world. But unfortunately, he's not building bridges taking valuable things from both worlds and put them together, but he's trying to tell the story that you just need the crisis negotiation framework to be successful in every negotiation, even in a business negotiation. And this is for sure wrong. And I think the most important thing is that we have to understand that there is one sentence in that book that is really, really false, and that is the sentence: a hostage negotiation is a business negotiation like any other business negotiation, because hostage taking is a business like any other business. And this is simply not true. So if we use, and I think that's really helpful to understand where we can use that framework. If we use the 3D negotiation framework from David Lex and James Sebenius, two of my really the teachers that were really influential on my thinking and teaching, and we have a look on these 3 dimensions. The first dimension they call at the table. It's the communication process. It's the interaction at the table. And on that first dimension, it is 90% the same, whether you have a business negotiation or you have a crisis negotiation. We very often think that it is that business negotiation is a game of giving good reasons, but I don't believe that this is true. If we have a look from a neuroscience, from cognitive neuroscience perspective on negotiation, we understand that it is an influencing game, nothing else. So on the first dimension, it's an influencing game, and these crisis negotiators are the world leading best influencers, because they are in such complicated situations where influencing is all that they have. On the second dimension, the deal design or deal structuring dimension, I think both worlds have nearly nothing in common. So it is a totally different thing. In crisis negotiation, you don't do value creation. You don't create self-enforcing contracts. You don't implement implementation-oriented clauses and things like contingency deals and stuff like that. And you don't have long-term relationships, so it
hopefully
is
not. Yes.
So it's not that important to for reputation building and look on precedences, strategic relationship management, stuff like that. So on that second dimension, it is a totally different world. So if a crisis negotiator is telling you, like Chris Voss is, that you just have to play the influencing game and then everything will work well, he simply does not understand how economic optimization in negotiations work. And we from a business school perspective, we do, and we can teach them how to do that. My friend Gary Nussner totally acknowledged that. We had done some workshops together teaching influencing for business negotiations, and he was always saying, I'm not an expert on business negotiations, and I'm not an expert on deal structuring. So ask Andreas how to do that. I can tell you, if you know what type of optimization and what deal you want to push through, then I can tell you how you could do that, how you could be more persuasive, bringing forward your offers and your ideas for structuring the deal. So the third dimension, away from the table, there's something we can learn from the crisis negotiators, like using the media and like building up an effective negotiation system. But there's also a lot of very specific business issues, like dealing with a buying center. A crisis negotiator doesn't doesn't do some sort of dealing with a buying center and hidden influencing strategies and stuff like that. That's not what they do. So, what they do. So we on that specific on this specific level, we can say there is a lot that we can take from crisis negotiations, and Chris Voss is right on that. But crisis negotiation is not the solution and is not the better way of negotiate a business deal.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Andreas, for sharing your perspective. There's one more one more aspect which those of our listeners and viewers who have read Never Split the Difference probably have come across, especially if they were trained by let's say in their business or illegal studies, or in their other respected negotiation programs, that is making the first offer. Right, because one of the things that Chris Voss mentions in there is never do that, never make the first offer as a negotiation, which we know by now after about 20 years of more than that, about 30 years of scientific research. We know that it's simply not true, that making the first offer does have an impact, and substantial impact on the final outcome of an agreement. However, there's an interesting exception which illustrates exactly the difference between crisis situations and business, and that is we've until recently we typically said, well, there's one exception where information asymmetry is to your disadvantage.
Yeah.
Yes, which means, well, if you know less about the subject matter than your partner does, well, let them go first. And I think that exception describes most of the crisis situations. Yes, and I think the logical fallacy of never split the difference is generalizing based on n equals 1. Right? If we take, let's say, information asymmetry or significant information asymmetry to our disadvantage as a general description of our world or negotiation settings, well, then it's legitimate to make that claim. But unfortunately, we can still prepare. We can still neutralize information asymmetry. Right, Andreas? What do you think about it?
Yeah, absolutely. First of all, it's a funny thing that you asked me a question on first offers, since you had done huge research on that, and you had published a wonderful paper, I think a year ago or 2 years ago on that topic, and it shows that there are different perspectives and different situations, but I totally agree. In the majority of cases, I also would advise to use a first offer, especially if you can use some tactics to reduce the risk that it is too extreme. But then we have a look on the deal that the crisis negotiators are doing, and I think that tells us about the main difference. They don't do compromises. So
Exactly.
so Chris Voss is telling you, don't do compromises, never split the difference. And in his world, this is true. So if you have 4 hostages, we will not agree to a deal. Okay, you can take 2 of them and kill them and do whatever you do. Give me 2 of them and we are fine. I want all 4 hostages to be released. I want you to surrender and to go in jail. So this is, and there is nothing to bargain on these main issues.
Correct.
We can negotiate whether you get a pizza or whether you can call your mom before you go to jail, or you can speak in the radio or something like that. We can negotiate over that, but we will not negotiate on these issues. All hostages has to be released. You have to surrender, and you have to go to jail. So this is the situation where the crisis negotiators are in. It is because they have absolute superior power. Because the BATNA of the hostage taker is that the SWAT team comes in and most probably will kill them. So they have a really bad now. So from that high power position, the only thing you have to do as a crisis negotiator is to calm down the emotional situation. And I hear Gary Nessner in the podcast episode 2 weeks ago describing how that works in detail. I will not too much go in that, but you just have to put that down, stalling for time, wait your negotiation partner to understand the real situation and his no deal option, and all will go in a way that's good for you as a crisis negotiator.
Right.
I don't mean that this is a simple task. That's a really complicated, but economically, there's nothing to negotiate. So in nearly every business negotiation that we or anyone else who hears that podcast has to negotiate, there is a room, the ZOPA, for negotiation. So if we have just a very simple negotiation, but if we have a distributive negotiation between 2,000 and 2,500, we have to agree on how we split these 500 euros negotiation value between us. So, of course, we will compromise in a way. Of course, we will do value creation and do all this win-win tactics and techniques and stuff like that. Yes, of course. But at the end, we will compromise a little bit. We have to. Otherwise, in business negotiations, we will not find a solution that is good for us. So we have that room because no one has that superior power that he can force the other person to totally surrender. And if we understand how these situations differ, we understand that it is not enough to negotiate simple like the crisis negotiators are negotiating. We have to implement the economic optimization level, the second dimension level. We have to implement that and combine that with the influencing tactics and techniques that we can learn from the FBI crisis negotiators, because that is the thing that they do really well.
Yes. Wow. Thank you, Andreas, for for making those differences, for describing those differences in a very precise way. We're getting slowly getting questions from the audience, and to you guys out there, you're welcome to post your questions. We'll try to answer as many of them as we possibly can within the time limits that we have. But let me maybe before we tackle some of the questions that are in the chat, let me maybe talk about the biggest lessons and the biggest lessons that business people can. We know the differences. Yes, we know the differences now. We know that negotiating a deal in business is not the same as releasing hostages or negotiating in crisis situations in general. But what is the biggest lesson? The biggest lesson that we as business negotiators can take with us and apply in our business situations from crisis negotiators, from great crisis negotiators like, for example, Gary Nessner?
Well, it's difficult to prioritize because I think there's some very good learning points. But if I would say the biggest lesson, I would say one thing. Or if you feel that I had persuaded you, so successful persuasion is a feeling. It is a feeling in the emotional part of your brain. It is not some logical conclusion in the outer part where the cognitive thinking is taking part, the conscious thinking is taking part. It is a feeling. It is an emotion in the emotional center of your brain. So if you want to go to a yes, to a commitment yes, you have to be able to create this feeling in the unconscious part of the brain of your negotiation partner. And you will not be successful in doing that if you come up with really logical reasoning. So Chris Voss, in his book, he's writing a sentence that I really think is on point on that topic. He says, "That's right is a winning strategy in all negotiations. But hearing you are right is a disaster." And that's the very important distinction. Okay. We try to get a yes exactly from the emotional part of our negotiation partner, and all our influencing strategies should have that goal in mind. If we understand that, we understand the basic truth that likability is the most important fundamental thing in negotiation. So if you harm the relationship, you will not be successful in negotiating. So for a professional negotiator, even in business negotiations, the number one commandment should be treat your opponent with respect and try to work on that bonding, on that building a trustworthy, trustful human relationship from human to human, not from a business logic, not from a CEO to another C-level guy. No, from a human to human bonding. So everything which is harming that is not a good idea to implement in a negotiation. And we have, especially in the German-speaking world, where we have some industries and companies that are still believing in false truth on negotiation. We have that. We have people negotiating, especially in purchasing, creating some sort of courtroom hardball where you get attacked from the first moment on, attacked as a person, attacked on your integrity, and stuff like that. And anything of that works against you if you try economic optimization. This is simply not professional. This is, I would say, this is the most valuable lesson that we can learn from the crisis negotiators. And I think that's the answer to the question, or to many negotiation questions that practitioners are bringing to us as negotiation trainers.
And you anticipated the question which I was about to show from the audience. So let me read it out loud. One of our listeners or viewers is asking whether you have a statistically successful formulaic approach to the tactics you use in your opposition research or practical applications when it comes to negotiation. So how do you as Andreas Winheller negotiate? What is the if you were to squeeze everything that you know about which is a lot, into one recommendation, one sentence, one motto that we can write on the wall in nice cursive font and or handwriting, what would it be?
It would be that I first want to hear a yes exactly coming from a heart after a summarizing that I did before I bring forward my proposals and my offers and stuff like that. So I first focus on really understanding the basic needs, the interests, the emotions, and I'm using the active listening skills that you had already discussed with Gary Nussner. I'm a really, really summarizing fan. That's one of my most favorite techniques from the active listening skills of the FBI. Summarizing means you tell the other person what you have heard and what you think about his basic needs. What does he want? What does he need? And why does he need that? And if you do it in a way where you get that, yes, exactly. That's the difference. Not the yes, yes, exactly. Coming from the heart, you see that the other person is touched through your ability to create understanding. Then you can bring forward all the proposals and all the ideas for your win-win approach and for deal structuring and how to implement and how to work together and how to create some conflict resolution procedures and stuff like that. After that, first work on that yes exactly, and it's a game changer if you do that.
Thank you, Andreas, for sharing this. This is amazing. So you would say first build. We got a nice comment from Guido. Build a human-to-human connection before you start juggling with value. Yes. So it's empathy basically that we're emphasizing, and or relationship building. And this is exactly Andreas, that we run negotiation competitions for students and professionals, and this is exactly what we emphasize in our assessment method. Yes, we say, yes, substance is important, value creation and claiming is important, but it's only possible or it's only sustainable if there is a strong relationship built between negotiators while doing so. Yes, and empathy is the key. Empathy is the key. Is the willingness to understand and show that we genuinely attempt to reflect the interests of the other party in our analysis of the situation. But empathy is not everything, and let's tackle the other part of the coin now,
Yeah.
because we know that those of us who are empathetic, they can really well create value. They can understand interest, create value, but they are on the weaker side when it comes to getting the larger piece of that value. So, Andreas, what would an FBI negotiator say when it comes to value claiming and assertiveness? What do you think?
Well, first of all, I'm not an FBI negotiator, but I've heard Gary answering questions like that. And we had some discussions about that, because they are not that huge value claimer. That's not their world. And they don't have so much tactics on how to do that. That's a difference. On empathy, I think it is very important to be quite clear what definition of empathy we're using, because there are a lot of them. What is really helpful is to make the distinction between empathy as a unconscious ability to connecting to the other person, and perspective-taking ability. The perspective-taking ability is mostly coming from the outer part of the brain, from the conscious part of the brain, and it's an ability to strategically think through the perspective of the other person. So understanding the other person. This PDA is always a very huge asset and helps you to improve your business, your negotiation performance in business negotiations. Empathy is a tricky thing, as you said. When I was in Harvard 2001, my mentor, my course leader was Bob Nukin. Bob Nukin, he was then the director of the program on negotiation, and he wrote that wonderful book, Beyond Winning. And he has his model with the 3 tensions. And he's describing there that there is this tension between empathy and assertiveness. And we have to manage that. And managing means, first of all, that you are self-conscious and self-controlled during the negotiation process. You're not only acting intuitively, and you be more assertive or more empathetic in relation to the situation. If you have a negotiation situation where just the deal is the goal, you have a huge bitter conflict, to find a solution for all parties that is agreeable is a win, is a great thing. Then you switch and be 90% empathetic. But you should not do that in a normal business negotiation. In a normal business negotiation, you start being a little bit more empathetic, but being always aware on what you're saying because of the information dilemma. Because of every sentence that you said, even in the beginning of the negotiation, has his effects on value claiming at the end. But you start being a little bit more empathetic, and then you shift it when bonding rises, you shift it a little bit more on being assertive. But you be assertive in a likable way. And this is a competency that very much, but that many business negotiators don't have, but should develop. I call that, and I don't have an English term for that. In German, I call that professionelle Hartnäckigkeit. So it means you're stubborn, you're really stubborn, you're really rigid in fulfilling your goals, but you're totally flexible in where the money is coming from. And you try to be the most respectful, most likable person on earth in dealing with the other person or with the other human. I think this is the most important thing, that you don't switch to the assertive mode after. So you start with building bonding, then you switch to assertive mode and being rude. Then, that's not a good idea, because then the other person doesn't trust you anymore. I think you think that was a trick, some sort of, you try to simply to overcome him. So you have to try that bonding, but with PTA, you just try to make offers that are persuasive for the other person. That sounds good, and you use professional framing strategies to let your substance sound really good, and maybe more than it really is.
Maybe more than it really is. Yes. So I call it the panda, becoming or negotiating like a panda. But we're going to talk about it probably later on. Frank, who is based in the Netherlands, where our negotiation competition is taking place this year, or the finals of our negotiation competition is taking place this year. So, and Frank is asking about relationship building. Would you argue that the behavioral change stairway model that we discussed with Gary in our last episode, developed by him for his crisis unit for his crisis unit at the FBI, is the way to go, or do you believe that there are other frameworks or perspectives that are stronger, let's say, more effective when it comes to relationship building? What do you think, Andreas?
I think the behavioral change stairway model is a wonderful model because it is helpful on focusing our attention on doing the first things first. So don't come up with some sort of influencing strategies without having built a workable relationship. So and this is what this model is saying. Start with empathy. Start with focusing on the other person. Use these active listening skills. Try to raise rapport, and then you can bring the other person to cooperate. And I think it's a wonderful model, really helpful to understand that. But it is a model that describes how initial, so in a moment between humans, rapport and bonding is developed. In a business world, we also have other effects on relationship, for example, reputation. So you can use, for example, you should work on having a reputation in your industry that helps you when you start a negotiation with someone new, first thing. But the second thing, you can use third dimension strategies, using public relation, using social media to prepare before the negotiation and away from the table a sense of reputation with your negotiation partner. And you can start, let's say, on +10 and not on 0 when the negotiation at the table starts. So I would add strategies like that in a business world, especially in industries where we have just some huge players. I think there are these strategic, I call this strategic relationship management, and these strategies are, I think, at least that important as the initial bonding building tactics at the table.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for enriching our perspective on relationship building, Andreas, with strategic relationship building, which is, I consider, also extremely important. Let me throw in my question, because we know that all of us have certain triggers which raise our emotional responsiveness. Yes, and we tend to classify some of our partners as difficult when they manage to touch those levers, touch those triggers, or to activate those triggers. Yes. What would be our recommendation, Andreas, when it comes to dealing with difficult negotiation partners? Yes, regardless of where the difficulty comes from. Yes, I think we all know that, or we have all been in similar situations where we simply felt uncomfortable, yes, while negotiating either for ourselves or our constituencies in more business-like context. What do we do? What can we learn from the FBI, who deal typically on an everyday basis with difficult negotiation partners? Is there anything that we can borrow from them?
Well, from my perspective, it is the importance of self-control. by far the best book on that topic. Let me show it for everyone who is here, is Hostage at the Table from George Corriza. He's writing a book on business negotiations from his crisis negotiation background. But there are chapters on early childhood experiences and how they affect on our actual negotiation behavior. And his story is that a professional negotiator be aware of being taken as a hostage by a negotiation partner. Be taken as a hostage means that you come out of your driver's seat, you lose your ability of strategically acting, and you come just in an emotional reacting mode. So self-control is key. There is nobody can make you upset. It is simply not possible for me to make you upset, because if you get upset, that's an autonomous reaction or an autonomous decision within the unconscious part of your brain. It is your decision. It's a part of you, Remy, that makes that decision to get in anger,
as a response,
get on high stress and stuff like that. It's not me. I'm not able to do that unless you let me do that. So the most important thing is that you work on yourself, or we, all of us, understanding our triggers and simply try to protect them, that we learn where they are. They are some like buttons. I always say, every one of us has these hot buttons here. And if someone comes and makes push, we explode. So if we know our hot buttons, because we have analyzed that, we can protect them. And if someone comes and make that, we can step back and go to the balcony, as William Ury is saying, go to the balcony and stop that reaction because it is overwhelming us. But to be able to do that, we have to be aware of our shadows or of our demons, because every one of us has these triggers, and these triggers are very valuable thing, because these triggers helped us to survive our early childhood.
I know my trigger, Andreas. I know my trigger is unfairness. Yes, when I have a perspective at a negotiating table that someone is trying to take an unfair advantage, in my perspective, of course, and let's put aside the definition of fairness or unfairness, because that would fill a complete episode, right? But when I feel that someone is intending or intends to take advantage of me in a negotiation, that triggers me. That triggers me very quickly. And what can I do? I know that I have this trigger, yes, and I know that switches me off from rationality to emotionality, yes, and that's where the more emotional we are, the less rational our responses become. Yes, what can I do to keep my cool?
Yeah, well, in the workshops that we did with Gary, we started to try to reflect on our triggers, to be aware of them. The next step that we did in these workshops were to reflect on where they're coming from. What situations in your life are root of this situation? What people where you feel loyalty to? Are focusing on these issues also. what are some deep needs within you, and what is a part of your identity that is combined with this triggers. So this is the first step. And then, we have to dive deeper. So what we get as a feedback from the Gary Nessner course from our participants were that it was really helpful, but in the situations where you have your really huge demons, your most favorite demons, it is not enough. And that's why we have developed a special workshop that we do the first time now in March with two psychological specialists, which are really good in analyzing or helping people analyzing their past and their biography, and helping people to switch emotional modes, to learn to switch emotional modes. There's just small techniques, but it's nothing that you can simply describe in 2 minutes and take away. That would not be a good thing. But we have a huge toolbox of small techniques, and the Lorenz Wahanka, who's one of my experts that I'm cooperating with. He's one of the leading experts on this topic in Germany. Maybe if you're interested in, just ask Lorenz. I think he would be really happy to do a podcast episode on self-control with you.
Absolutely. It sounds like a great recommendation. Thank you, Andreas, for sharing this. I will reach out to Lawrence. You guys should also, probably to cast out those demons, you should have an exorcist in your in your workshop. But tell us, Andreas, when does the workshop?
Just one sentence, please. But the thing is, this is feeding the demons. If you see them as demons and as bad, and if you try to separate from them, you're feeding them and you make them stronger. You have to integrate them. You have to respect them. You have to appreciate them for what they did in the past. And just when you integrate them and no longer try to hide them for the world, from the world, right? To integrate them in your basic contrast, in your basic personal concept, then you can start to be able to control them.
I definitely need to speak with Lawrence about it. Yes, he is a psychologist and exorcist, right? And in some religious, indeed, in some religious systems, demons are a part, or are considered a part of our human nature. And indeed, embracing them is, let's say, something that we need to learn. So we're slowly coming to an end. We still have a couple of questions in the chat, but let me maybe ask one more before I display the latest question. Success stories, Andreas. So does applying FBI tactics in business work? And if yes, do you have a success story from your mentees where they proudly reported, "Hey, I applied it and it really worked"?
Well, the most touching story that I felt, and I can share it with the world because he was publishing it on LinkedIn, was a friend of mine, Stefan Park from Vienna. He was the quota Chinese, as we knew him in the LinkedIn, in the German LinkedIn world. Stefan Park, he was a participant in the first workshop that we had with Gary, and he was a premium participant. So he had a one-on-one coaching with us the day after that, and he came with a situation that he was separated from his son, I think since 3 or 4 years. Okay, and he had tried everything with lawyers and courts and nearly everything. And then I just watched Gary coaching him on how to communicate with the mother of his son and the family when he was flying to Taiwan. And when he came back, Stefan Park made a LinkedIn post that it was a totally different world, that he had contact to his son, was able to put him in his arms for the first time in 3 years, started to get a relationship back and stuff like that. And that shows that even in bitter disputes, and we also have bitter disputes in business negotiations sometimes, even then, if you step back and if you try to engage in strategic engagement, that means applying the active listening tactics in the behavior change stairway model and working back on bonding, summarizing, little bit mirroring and labeling to put down the emotions. You can create new ground, a new playing field where you can find new solutions that hadn't been there before.
Wow, amazing! Yes, I'm glad that that it has worked for Stefan. And I keep telling my students, hey, never engaged with someone emotionally also who's a bad negotiator, because it's just asking for trouble. So choose as a partner someone who's a better negotiator than you are, so that when conflicts come, yes, so that you guys know what to do with them. And let us. I have two more questions, and we're slowly approaching the end of our episode. One comes from the audience. Are any new studies either of you have read recently related to negotiation that you would recommend, and why?
Okay. Well, this is a little bit that's a hard question to prioritize. But well, what I was 6 weeks ago. I was in Harvard for the 40th birthday of the Harvard program on negotiation, and I was attending a workshop which was a really mind-blowing experience for me, from Hannah Riley Bowles. Hannah Riley Bowles from Harvard Kennedy School. She's one of the leading experts on the world on doing research on gender topics, on negotiation, status topics on negotiation. He was addressing the issues: are women negotiating different from men? And he was reporting a lot of new studies. Let me just read what she was giving as summarizing of her lecture. The gender of a person is not a reliable predictor of negotiating behavior. Gender effects in negotiation are situational. So we have to look much more on context, much more especially on status context, than on gender, to explain, to find a real explanation on some effects that had been reported in earlier studies 10, 20, 30 years ago. And I think these field of gender studies on negotiation, this field is emerging and switching in a way that could be really helpful to understand a lot of effects on the power level and on the status level.
Yes, I remember. I remember seeing Hannah in action also a couple of months ago. Maybe for those of us who are not aware of the larger context, for many years or decades, I think decades. We focused in research on observations in very particular types of negotiations. So the gender studies were conducted in distributive, strongly distributive context, like salary negotiation and stuff like that, or experiments which were one-dimensional. And in those experiments, women in general didn't do that as well as men did. Yeah? So for many decades, we thought, men negotiate better than women, but it turns to be, as Andreas nicely quoted, it tends to be highly situational. It depends on two dimensions, and that is how stereotypical roles are perceived in a particular organization. So basically, if an organization believes that women are worse negotiators, then tend to perform worse. and the other one I don't remember from the top of my head, but the bottom line is. Gender is not a good predictor of performance, of negotiation performance. Women negotiate just as well as men on average in general, and so on. My last question, Andreas, and then I'll let you and our listeners and viewers go. Enjoy the evening and rest of the day. Great negotiators, Andreas. Who comes to your mind when you think about greatness in negotiation?
Well, one person that's really impressing me is Maurice Talleyrand. Maurice Talleyrand, he was foreign minister first at the end of the French Revolution. Then he was the foreign minister for Napoleon. And then he stays the foreign minister for the reinstituted new king of France, negotiating for France at the Vienna Congress without losing any of the territories that France had held before they started the wars with Napoleon, even after the total defeat. That's not bad. But I have just one more who's much more impressive to me, and that's my older daughter. It's my oldest daughter, Leonie. And she's from tactical and relationship management, she's the best negotiator in the world. And I've seen Gary doing things, but I can tell you, my daughter, she's mentally handicapped. She has Down syndrome. She's mentally handicapped, but she's implying to be the perfect way, flexible and stubborn. So she started on asking for, can I watch television? We say no. She's not doing drama, but she says, okay, so maybe we can play something. No, at the moment, just okay. Can I have an ice cream? No, ice cream. Some chocolate. And she's doing that for, if necessary, 5 or 6 minutes, but she's doing that longer than any opponent, even me or my wife, is able to stand, because at the same time she's doing it in such a likable way, building bonding and creating that idea of respect. So I think a business negotiator that would apply, and I'm not able to apply it in that perfect way myself. I have that role model. I'm not able, but I think a business negotiator that comes close to that idea of stay with your goal as long as it takes, being flexible as maximum in maximum, and being respectful, building bonding. He can reach anything in that world.
Thank you, Andreas, so much. Well said. All the best to Leonie. Andreas, thank you so much for sharing your experience, your knowledge with our viewers and listeners. We learned a lot. We know that FBI techniques are partially universal, especially when it comes to relationship building, but they become very powerful when we combine them with value engineering techniques that we know from that we know from negotiation analysis, non-crisis context. And once we are equipped with both, hey, we become the pandas. And what the pandas are, the panda bear tactics and strategies are, we're going to talk in the next episode of the podcast on negotiation. Andreas, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you, Remy, for having me.
And until next time on the podcast on negotiation, thank you guys. All the best. Take care. Thank you.